Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to another episode of Islam for Europeans. I'm your host, Robert. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for all of your support. And I'm here with a very special guest today. I'm so glad that I was finally able to set something up with him. We have Brother William Barylo, who's coming to us from, I think, is it the UK right now, William, or
Yes, in
France?
the UK, yeah.
Okay, great. How's the weather there?
Alhamdulillah, we've got a huge heat wave at the moment, which is uh, quite, it's not like America or Europe levels, it's like 22 degrees, but yeah, it's you see people like walking with no t-shirts on the streets. That's typically from the UK, a little bit of sunshine and everyone goes crazy.
Yeah, we had a heat wave here last week. The average high was 33 and the humidex was about 40. So
Wow.
it was pretty brutal. But we made it through, alhamdulillah. It's nice and cool this morning. So yeah, I responded to your video, the hierarchy of converts in the UK a couple of weeks ago. Try to give like a critique or an analysis of some of the problems faced by converts. And I'm glad you responded to it. I'm glad we could have this discussion because first and foremost, hopefully this will be a good civil discussion. And me myself, I up until about 5 years ago, I used to think exactly the same way in terms of how do we solve the issues faced by converts. And then having had several experiences and all culminating, and taking a step back and looking at the problem, I propose a very different solution than mainstream Islamic organizations, and it's all based upon this theory of what I call the Medina model, and why it's flawed, and why we need to rethink about how what are the problems faced by converts and how do we solve those issues. So I'll give you the floor, William. I want you to just to give your analysis on what you think the problems are and how we should solve them. And I'll give my analysis, a response to that. So yeah, William, and just or maybe if you want to talk about why you created this video, as it relates to converts in the UK, and what needs to be done in order to change things. So the floor is yours, William. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's a very, very broad question because my job is to understand what people do and why do they do such things. Which means I do not necessarily have solutions because when it comes to society, I think there's no one solution for all, one magical trick that will solve all the issues because it's very complex. You have lots of different layers, lots of different factors and variables. So uh, the thing is, if we take the video I made as a starting point, I wanted to illustrate how the British social structure has been reflected in minority communities, especially amongst Muslims, while paradoxically, if people were following the religion, such a hierarchy or classification would, in theory, not exist. Um, the thing is, my conclusion was, change is, when it comes to a society level, is very difficult to enact. Even on a personal level, if you want, convince someone to change, improve, or whatever, it's a lot of work. I mean, your background is psychology, so you may know a thing or two about it. But so when it comes to society levels, it's just almost an impossible task. I mean, I want to stay hopeful, but so I think the best course of action is, I mean, this is again what works for me. It might not work for another person in another context, but is to, if you cannot find a community or a fertile soil where to flourish and grow your relationship with God, then we can just craft our own. We can just build our own, which means sticking with the people who nurture us, who help us get closer to God, and um, yeah, take the initiative, because yeah, the society is not always gonna be there for people. I mean, you have some pockets. I have to say you can find them, but in my experience in the UK, it's rare. I had wonderful experiences in France where the context is completely different, but I think yeah, the UK is another beast altogether.
Yeah, so thank you for that, William. And I appreciate that commentary. I'm glad that you had that experience in both the UK and France, because unfortunately I don't have the funds to go to Europe proper and to live that experience. So I'm just going to push back on that respectfully, and let me know what you think. You know, my view of the problem is that people especially in the contemporary West, but also in any country, whether that's Muslim or non-Muslim, they belong to their own groups, they belong to their own social spheres, their own cultural spheres. Sometimes that's based off of nationality, sometimes it's based off culture, sometimes it's based off of language, sometimes it's based off of a sport you play. And this is just simply natural human behavior. And no matter how nice or well-intentioned a Muslim community is or is not, at the end of the day, they're not going to have the appropriate tools or resources or wherewithal to deal with problems associated by converts. And the solutions we've been trying overwhelmingly by Islamic organizations presupposes that everybody lives in the same cultural sphere. And this is a major problem. Just to give you one, small example, I surveyed converts as to, what are the five biggest problems that the converts are facing? And number one is managing the relationship with your non-Muslim family and community. Now, when I converted to Islam in 2003, I lived in a small town called Amherstburg, Ontario, which was 95% white and almost completely non-Muslim. There was no mosque. I had to go to Windsor, which is 30 minutes away, to see the mosque and the Muslim community. I was accepted as one of these like celebrity converts. I jumped right in. I was very extroverted. I made a lot of good friends. They were very nice people. They always wanted to hang out with me. But at the same time, they simply had no desire or were very, very, very reluctant to meet my non-Muslim family and friends. You really literally had to drag them out to Amherstburg. They just did not want to go there. And vice versa. My non-Muslim family was very accepting. My dad shook my hand when I converted. Alhamdulillah, it was very smooth process for me in terms of, telling my non-Muslim family that I converted. Even my non-Muslim friends, they didn't have a negative reaction. But a mosque or even a halal restaurant was simply not their turf. They just did not want to go there. So, like non-Muslim environs are simply not conducive to have any Muslim, especially a practicing Muslim there. There's dogs, there's alcohol, there's heavy metal music playing, there's scantily clad women, people swearing. It's just an environment they don't want to enter. And, for good reason. I can understand why they don't want to do that. And I can understand why non-Muslim people don't want to be in a mosque or even in a halal restaurant. It's foreign territory to them. So what do you do when you have these converts that are simply caught in the middle? And, whatever convert program they try to devise at an Islamic organization or a masjid, the only thing they focus on is advanced religious instruction. And that's a piece of the puzzle. It's an essential piece, but one, it's far too advanced for most people who convert to Islam. I mean, you're trying to teach graduate level courses to preschoolers. That's one thing. But secondly, these programs don't even understand what the problems are faced by converts. And I think you can't blame a Muslim community or a mosque for that. I mean, we can try to get angry at them or feel disappointed. But I think at the end of the day, whatever their intentions are, whether they're pure or there's malintent or racism or whatever. I mean, that's just normal, natural human behavior. They, like the British Pakistani Muslims have gone through, generations of being beaten up and packy bashing from the white British. So it's understandable why they would be angry at the white British in general. So to sum up, like even if they were as nice as pie, and I'm going to use some non-white examples, just to illustrate this point. It's Mosques are simply square pegs for round holes and trying to solve problems faced by converts. And the best solution is that the converts themselves need to create their own organizations, their own fora, their own networking, their own restaurants, all the things that born Muslim communities in the West have already done so. They've already created these things because they live in their own social spheres. Pakistanis live in their own social spheres. Somalis live in their own social spheres. Arabs live in their own social spheres. That doesn't mean that you're separating yourselves from the greater Muslim community. But this is just simply natural human behavior. I mean, there's a Turkish center in Windsor, Ontario, and most people who go there are Turks, and they speak Turkish at the mosque for their meetings and such. It doesn't mean that other Muslims are banned from going there, but that center is there to address the needs of a population that, just like many others in the West, have collectivized around a shared heritage and culture. So that's basically what my theory is in a nutshell. You can't use the Medina model because people don't live in the same social spheres. What I call the alternative approach is called the Chiapas model. In Chiapas, Mexico, the Tzotzil Muslims converted to Islam as a group. They created their own mosques, their own organizations, their own food. They incorporated the halal aspects of their culture, and now they're a thriving community in the heartland of Mexico. So this model is night and day compared to the Medina model, which many Islamic organizations have unfortunately been trying to follow for decades. So that's basically my analysis of the problem. Just let me know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think I agree because you are just describing what is actually happening in the society. It's as you mentioned, it's a natural human response to trust and stick people who share like similarities, especially when it comes to culture. And what I wanted to say on that is, yeah, what you're suggesting is, for people just to carry on their own lives independently of uh, what the others think, and like have their own initiatives, create their own support networks, and I think, yeah, this as I mentioned in my video, this is something I very much agree with. Um, However, because when it comes to converts being feeling isolated and in need of support and people sharing similar experiences, I think it's also comforting to have people who share these experiences to either validate or support, nurture people. I think it's a natural human dynamic. But I think the issue becomes when it comes to the main narrative that you find either in mosques, in student associations, in charities, which promote this Madina model, because this is what was happening uh, in the early days of the Islamic revelation. However, my contention is that people sell it, market this Madina model as Islam's unique selling point, which means that wherever you go, in any mosque, people, it's almost like the main argument that people will make, that, the Ummah is one body. If one finger hurts, the whole body hurts. The Quran verse, like in 49:13, we have made tribes and nations for you to know each other. And I think it's it hides or almost denies the social reality that we're talking about. That it's not, if you embrace Islam, you're not going to find this marvelous family who will be with you and behind you no matter what happens. Reality is very much different, and I think this is what hurts converts, especially when it comes to marriage, finding jobs, or trying to find a support network. So I see there's almost, I would say, a cognitive dissonance, but at the same time, I wonder if people who say these kind of things there, are you familiar with the concept of manifesting, this new age concept of manifesting? If you want to be rich, just think that you are already rich. Um, so I think um, it's almost like people are trying to manifest something that happened, and uh, ideally maybe I think it should happen, uh, but ignoring that, no, this is not what people need to hear. They need to be given the tools to deal with the social reality we live in. What do you think about this?
Well, I think that a major reason why, and this is why I think you can't put the blame on Islamic organizations. A reason why they don't think about these things is because it's a case of and what we call, and and you're a sociologist, survivorship bias. So for those who don't know who are watching the channel, survivorship bias is when you try to do a study and your results are skewed to the general population because the people who are not surviving to get to your study don't become part of the analysis. Usually, when it comes to mosques, Islamic organizations, um, there's a very high bar or a cutoff point to not just convert to Islam, but to dive into an existing Muslim community, to talk the way they talk, speak the way they speak, to basically, like you said, have the Muslim community be your new family. Usually, and also another factor is getting converts who think the same way you do politically. Like self-loathing, anti-white attitudes, an extroverted personality, the ability to learn a new system. These are all factors that sort of, cut off the vast majority of people who take their shahada, leaving only the people who are already well adjusted and they already have usually a good relationship with their family. So, if you were to survey these people who are already very successful and say, what do converts need? They're going to give you a totally different set of responses than the people who take their shahada and then you never see them again. Right. So in that way, I don't think you can blame Islamic organizations. And on top of that, these, these celebrity converts like myself, years ago, they kind of reiterate the same model, we need to be united. We need to be one ummah, so I think they kind of reinforce it, and I was in this for a long time because I never saw firsthand the struggling convert and what they go through until I was in a relationship where you saw firsthand what happens when you have a non-Muslim family that absolutely hates your conversion and hates Islam and hates Muslims. And you just have to, that's a totally different set of problems. So what you said about the fact that it's a fallacy, this idea of one ummah, I still believe that we're one ummah. I still believe that deep down inside we're all Muslims. We all believe in Allah and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as his final messenger. um and I think that that's fine, and that's a separate issue from the fact that we live in different communities and we speak different languages, and we have our own ways of doing, our own culture, and these different cultural clusters, they don't interact all the time. Having said that, a theoretical Islam for Europeans center or mosque, inshallah, down the road, hopefully, if we get a brick and mortar place, it will be run by Euro Muslims. The food will be from our culture. The aesthetics will be from our culture, but all Muslims will be welcome there. If they go in there, we don't care where you're from, like if, what your background is, you will get a hug. We will say assalamu alaikum. We will give you all your Islamic rights, just like all the other masajid, throughout the West, how they've done that for us. But when it comes to solving their particular issues, we don't know. We've never lived the experience of what what it's like to be an immigrant Muslim, or a visible a person Muslim who's a person of color. So I think I understand where you're coming from, and I do agree that they try to push this model, Islamic organizations, that the Medina model, we're all one ummah, i.e., we need to behave as one single homogeneous unit. But it's simply, like you said, not the reality. I mean, people, they live in their own spheres, they watch different sports, and they are in Muslim communities, like I said, they already have countless organizations in the West that cater to their own specific needs. I don't know about the UK, but in Canada alone, you can do a minute Google search. There's the Pakistani Canadian Association, the Syrian Canadian Association, the Sudanese Canadian Organization, the Bosnian Canadian Organization, and mosques never try to dismantle these groups. They never say, "Oh, these groups shouldn't exist." This is just because they just simply have a different set of problems. So, and I was at the Eid prayer for the Syrian Canadian Association, and I prayed in the same rows as them. I said assalamu alaikum to them. They are very warm, they are very friendly. So, it's a straw man argument from some of our detractors who are saying, we're trying to separate and divide the ummah, when you already have the exact same model from these organizations that are already doing these things. So to sum up, yeah, I do think that they tried this fallacy of this like kind of one ummah fallacy, and it hides the reality. But at the same time, it's more of an overarching zeitgeist that converts themselves actually reinforce. So I don't think you can lay all of the blame on existing Muslim communities. So.
Yeah, no, of course, and people are, it just, I think there's a, as I mentioned, disconnection, meaning that a lot of the time people are not really aware of what's going on the ground. And it's not on purpose, it's because, they don't know, they don't have the whole information. And as you mentioned, they have their own history of, especially when it comes to the UK, people who migrated to this country from lower social economic classes, and they have their own, they have to survive in the first place. So there's a lot of layers that, makes the situation as it is. I wanted to bounce on two points from what you said. The first point is about my experience in France, and second is about what is happening on your end in North America, which I find interesting. So first, talking about whenever I remember my 5 years being Muslim in France, I think this is also what explains why I had such a shock coming to the UK, because I always say that in France, it was really a time where I had found with Muslims a family outside of my blood family. And it was a time and a space. I'm sure things have changed, but it was a time and a space back then where people would, from any ethnic and cultural background, socioeconomic background, come together to do work, whether it was, feeding the homeless, helping students, setting up an alternative media. But the difference with the UK, for example, is that these I used to hang out with people who were, first of all, my generation, who had a similar history, immigrant parents coming to France, but we had all done our studies in France. We shared the same cultural references. We were taught the same things at school. We saw the same things happening in the media, because also, France is a bit more less socially fluid than in the UK. There's more social and economic mobility. But, the fact that we all watched, stupid things like Dragon Ball Z, Club Dorothée back in the days in France, we would already bond on these issues. And I think on top of it, the climate in the media and the political sphere in France is so openly anti-Islam, anti-Muslim, that I think people thought, we have to stick together. If not, like, we're not gonna it's not going to work. But that's for the younger generations. The older, they had their own issues. And in the UK, in comparison, well, we have a relative freedom of practicing the religion. Finding halal shops, madrasa, like whatever you name it. I think people being more comfortable and at the same time pushed by a society that generally pushes people to succeed financially, materially, as opposed to education and stuff. It creates their own bubbles, and yeah, people don't see the need of doing things together. But again, that's just a theory. I don't like. It's just my guess after what I've seen. A second thing is bouncing on the North American context, where uh, I think maybe many people have at first sight a problem with your initiative because they may not be familiar with the North American context where even the mainstream society, as far as I've seen, people are proud of their European roots, whether, I'm American, but yeah, I have Polish ancestry, I have Irish ancestry, I have Italian ancestry. And people are fine celebrating this because North America is made up of lots of different waves of immigration, and and I think it's legitimate for people to hold to their cultural roots and to celebrate them to this extent. Create, I don't know, an Italian or Polish cultural center. And I think this is something people in other places of the world which do not have experienced migration and diaspora may struggle to understand. But again, this is my guess. But yeah, I would be curious to know what was the response you had among fellow Canadian Muslims, European or not, about this initiative.
Yeah, great question. So, in regards to your first point, I get it that the converts in France and the people who come from a born Muslim background have a lot of commonalities. So, I wouldn't be denying that. I would still say that the major difference is that their entire families are Muslim, and then our entire families are not Muslim. So that's the first big difference. The second difference is that this will tie into the response to my second question, is that people who convert to Islam of European descent, there's no positive European Muslim identity like there is with African Americans who convert to Islam, or even Latinos who convert to Islam. For us, converting to Islam is just seen as a complete rejection of one's identity. Let's face it, our ancestors were Christians for centuries. Um, Islam, or more specifically the Ottoman Empire, was the total adversary, of Europeans for centuries. There was, like a lot of slavery on both sides. There's a lot of fighting on both sides. So that is a unique experience compared to, say, someone from, a French person, someone from whose ancestors are from North Africa, because being a Muslim is not, it's completely in line with their identity. Whereas for us, it's a complete rejection. And at the end of the day, how are they going to react when you bring them to dinner and you have dinner in front of your French non-Muslim family? I mean, just to give you a perfect example, one of the biggest and I'm not going to name him, one of the biggest, I guess, kind of Islamic sheikhs, in the Arab world, and he's spoken at Riz before. He talks about the spread of Islam in the West. Even he, in a speech, had French on his computer and say, why is there French on my computer? We should just get rid of it. It's a garbage language. And it's not just him. You watch that video and you look at all the comments from Muslims, just like, yeah, get rid of French. And look, I can understand because the Pieds Noirs, they oppressed the Algerians for a very long time. So their anger towards the French and even the French language is understandable. But can you really talk that way or act that way as a Quebecois who converts to Islam? Can you really talk or act that way to your family as a French person who converts to Islam? The answer is a resounding no. I mean, you can't you can't act the same way. It's a totally different ball game. And it's just, I can understand where the anger is coming from, But at the same time, I do not recommend that converts act in the same way. And you see a lot of converts who do that. They act very anti-white because they're trying to fit in. They'll say all sorts of stuff on social media. They'll have this incredible self-loathing. And all this does is, hurt them and hurt the whole Muslim community, because their priority number one, which should be improving their relationship with their non-Muslim family and community vis-a-vis Islam. Second point you raised about, Islam, like Islam for Europeans in North America, I would say that the reaction from most Muslims about Islam for Europeans has been very positive. They're very, they welcome this idea. They think it's a great initiative. They think that, European descendant Muslims or white Muslims should be organizing in the same manner, as long as, we're still connected to the greater Muslim community, and not separating ourselves. So yeah, and that goes for North America and Europe. Now, in North America, United States, Canada, what a lot of, white people, they've sort of discarded, their culture from back home, more so in the United States. They sort of acclimated to, the kind of the general American culture. Um, so it's going to be more difficult for them to kind of bring in these cultural aesthetics. It's not like Europe where, Italians, they have a very specific culture. Slovakians have a very specific culture. I was speaking with Jan, the Slovak Muslim, and, like he says, for iftar, like they don't serve halushki, or halal version of halushki, which is like their national dish. So they have their own traditional trad dress, that European converts can incorporate. So I think, this model is a lot easier to follow for people from Europe proper, because they have a cultural identity that would be very, much more easier to bring in, as opposed to Canada and the US, or if our culture's just been usurped by this kind of global model culture. But still, the fact remains is that, Toronto and, the rest of Ontario is a perfect example. Most of the Muslims in Toronto and the greater Toronto area, they've never really been in, a space that's majority white. I mean, Toronto's not less than 50% white now. And they fear going into like a more white city, even like London, which is like 75% white now. Like their blood pressure goes way up, because they're not used to being in a space that's, majority predominantly white. And even if, the most white Canadians don't have a problem with Islam, that doesn't matter to them, because for them, it's the random white person on the street, which could be anybody, that could hate Islam, that could try to attack them and things like that. So they simply don't want to live in these environments. They're very reluctant to, many of them. They go off of what they see on the media, and there's no, white people cannot organize in any. That's the other thing I wanted to point out. In Canada and the United States, it's almost illegal, or very difficult, for white people to organize themselves based on race for any reason. So that makes it very difficult. The only thing we usually can organize around de facto is like, the Republican Party or the Conservative Party, which doesn't go out and say, we're a white party, but most white people tend to flock there. And unfortunately, those tend to have like an anti-Islam bias. So the white people who don't have a problem with Islam, they just they can't form their organizations. They can't get out there and say, we support the Muslim community. And this is what leads to, tragically, two communities that really don't interact with one another whatsoever, and usually can have some, preconceived notions about one another. So that's my response to that, William. But yeah, just I don't know if you want to bounce off anything from what I just said.
Um, yeah, I would say, when you mentioned that converts erasing their identity, I think this is something that has been happening very often in the past. We're talking maybe 20, 30 years ago, automatically, because I'm talking from the French context. Becoming Muslim was a synonym of becoming Arab in a way. It was also very much either, for like working class people who would have North African, West African neighbors, or people who were, when they're a bit more middle class, upper middle class, it's more like from an Orientalist perspective. Oh, oh, these exotic dresses and food and stuff. And really, this has been happening also in the UK. You can see it.
Yeah.
However, I think now people are becoming a bit more comfortable keeping their identity, their culture, because it's just normal. And I think we also have, with the younger generation, lots of people who share like intrinsically like British and French culture. The parents were maybe a bit different, but people share the same cultural references. They went through the same schools. So it's I think there is a bit less, I would say, social cultural pressure to conform to a culture or another. And I think also what has happened is, in the wake of Black Lives Matter and all these movements around decolonization, I think it was a very emotionally heightened moment for many people, because it was, I think, the first time these issues were aired on mainstream media. And when it comes to these historic issues, I think these are issues which come with a lot of pain for people, for example, protesting against the killing of black teenagers in the US, or decolonization. It's and when people, especially in activist spaces, come with this place of pain, it doesn't need to express this. At the same time, there's going to be an overreaction on the other side, and I can understand why some converts to Islam who are white would make an extra effort to say I'm really not like all these people and stuff. But then there's no when a conversation is driven by emotions, it's usually very, very hard for people to navigate. So people react to something, then there's an overreaction, an overcorrection. And I mean, it's happening with like all the main things we see nowadays in the media. But I think um, with time, people are able to have some more nuance, and things eventually even out. So I'm feeling optimistic, for the future, that people can, yeah, comfortably keep their identity and make the difference. It's not because you are from a certain social class, from a certain ethnicity, that you are the same as the whole system. The same like debate around uh, people like Andrew Tate masculinity, and this is it's I think it's kind of the same thing. People are like being really want to express things, but yeah, because there's a lot of pain that people want to express, it doesn't really uh, yeah, it's not always well received or understood.
Well, I mean, my argument is that, if, our brothers and sisters who lean politically left, um, if they truly want to improve the situation, they should support Islam for Europeans. Because if you break down what their qualms are vis-a-vis the Anglosphere, and more specifically white Muslims, they'll make arguments such as, the reason why Muslims are oppressed in the West is because we're 99% people of color. Well, okay, if that's the case, then what's the solution to that? I mean, shouldn't the solution be more white Muslims? And and how do you do that? You help them collect, like if they collectivize, that way you can actually foster an environment where white people would not just convert to Islam, but stay in Islam and be more interested in it, and feel that when they do convert, there's going to be people there that will be able to take them in. The second argument that they make is that to say that white converts are far more privileged than black converts. I cringe when I hear the word privilege. I think it's been overused as a term by the left to kind of quash any disagreement, or this kind of used as a cudgel against white people. But at the same time, we do have a special responsibility. When you convert to Islam as a white person, hundreds of people from the same background, who raised you, who you played tennis with. It should be your responsibility to give dawah to these people, and that's very difficult to do as a single person. But if you have an organized group, then you can incrementally, show them the beauty of Islam via your actions. If you follow the prophetic model, and act with, with kindness, and show them the way. Over time, inshallah, you find that their hearts turn. Even the people when I first converted who absolutely despise Islam, like over time, after spending some time with them, they eventually, it dispelled a lot of their misconceptions and dispelled a lot of hatred in their hearts. But that's a long, arduous process. That can take years sometimes. And it's a totally different ball game than a born Muslim living in the West who has no association with they don't have any white non-Muslim family members. They don't have they don't hang out in white communities. So, and they, like you said, there's a lot of pain and anger, and they're visibly Muslim, so it's understandable why they wouldn't want to take on an endeavor such as this. So I'm gonna, having said that, I'm gonna bounce off this idea, and I was going to talk about this, even though it's controversial, in that when you have two totally different situations like this, I think the vast majority of people who end up taking their shahada, they end up leaving, like not fitting in with an existing Muslim community. And, I think part of that is, the fact that they live in different social groups, but I think also it's a kind of the idea of, the dropout rate of converts, some analyses or some imams have said that, the dropout rate of converts, or what they call the apostasy rate, is 70 to 80%, which is abysmal. But I think it's more just a fact of the matter that many of these people who take their shahada, they're simply not ready to practice fully or wear the hijab, or, attain a high level of Islamic education. And, these are the converts who kind of fall through the cracks. And I don't think that, every convert is going to be cut out to, achieve this high level or become a social influencer, and whatnot. I just think they're just faced with a totally different set of problems. And I don't think them marrying into a Muslim family is just something that's feasible for them. I mean, think about it. Converting to Islam is difficult enough. You have to pray 5 times a day. You have to fast during Ramadan. I wouldn't say difficult, challenging. It's an enormous challenge. But at the same time, if you add on top of that, assimilating into an existing Muslim community, it could be very overwhelming. And a lot of people just simply don't want to take on, for example, marrying into another culture, because, the cultures are very different. And you don't know how the families are going to react. Some families are going to be totally opposed to it. And I honestly don't blame a lot of these Muslim families who don't want to marry their son, or especially their daughter, to a convert, when these, our apostasy rates or dropout rates are much higher. And, you're going to have to deal with the fact that you have two families that could possibly hate each other for the rest of their lives. And not only you have to deal with that, but your spouse has to deal with that, and your future children will have to deal with that. So I don't think you can really blame a lot of these Muslim families for saying, what, that's great that you converted, mashallah, good for you. I just don't think that my son or daughter is ready, or us as a family is ready, to take on marrying a convert and having to deal with those kinds of situations. So let me know what your thoughts are on that, William.
Yeah, just for you to know, we've been cut off for I think a few seconds. Were you mentioning something along the lines of the responsibility of the converts to engage with the non-Muslims and potentially the Islamophobes?
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, yeah, that, and a lot of it, what I mean by, I didn't mean dawah by actually talking about Islam, because many times you can't even talk to them about Islam or religion in general. But if you, change your behavior and, embody the prophetic model in your actions, inshallah, that can change their hearts and minds. So yeah, that's
Okay. Yeah. So I fell back on my own feet then after the connection breakout. So yeah, just before the question of marriage in different cultures, so you mentioned, yeah, like people on Muslims on the left should accept Islam for Europeans, but I think it's not really a left-right problem. It's just something which has to do with communication and understanding, because the thing is, with all that has happened since the mid 2010, I think a lot of words have been thrown left, right, and center, like racism, like whiteness, masculinity. And my contention is that people don't understand what even they want to say with these words. People come from either a place of pain or a place of defensiveness on the other end. And yeah, the core of the conversation gets lost and nobody is able to improve the society because no one talks to each other. Basically, it's at each other, not to each other. So I think this is one issue. Uh, but again, I think with time, and some people are still able to have very reasonable and rational conversations around these issues. And I think, I want to be hopeful it's going to even out, but I think this is the core issue, the communication. The second thing you saw about the responsibility of converts, I think I like your approach, because obviously I've been asking myself this question in the sense that if we look at people like Hiram,
You cut out on for us for a second, William. Could you repeat what you just said? I chat up. You cut out on us for a second. Yeah. Hopefully, inshallah, you're enjoying the conversation, and just I think just got some technical issues. I can't really see William here. You may have to go in and back out, but let's see. William, if you can hear us, try exiting and going back in again. Oh, okay.
sorry, Robert, we've been cut off again.
Yeah, that's fine.
Where did I cut off?
From the beginning of when you started speaking about converts, the greater context of how it's not a left, right, center issue.
Oh, no. Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to sum up very quickly. So I think it's not a left and right issue. It's a communication issue. People don't know, don't even understand the words they are using, and people so become either speaking from a place of pain, from a place of defensiveness. But the problem is people talk at each other, not to each other. There's no dialogue, and there's no way to go forward. Then, and I think this is the problem we have been experiencing in the last years. Now, on your point to like the responsibility of converts to can you still hear me? Yes, yes. I thought we got cut off again. Oh, bloody internet. So yeah, I think when we look at figures like Joram van Klaveren, who are coming from the far right, decide to embrace Islam and are celebrated as heroes by so many Muslims, I think um, uh, there is the illusion that these people can be effective bridges somehow between uh, this entity we call Islam, this entity we call Muslims, and this entity we call the West, the far right conservatives, whatever. While the problem is these people have virtually or technically abdicated the power they had in their own spheres by embracing Islam and becoming the other, and uh, and for some reason, this is something I mean, I understand why do people celebrate them as heroes and stuff, because they think they have like the fame, the networks, and stuff. But I'm not sure they're gonna be like of any use this to say on the political on the political playground. And I think the best way is maybe these silent converts, this to say, who people don't necessarily know they're Muslim, but by showing the right example on a microscopic level, because I believe in the power of microscopic actions, on a local level, family unit, in the neighborhood. These actions get amplified, and the more people do it, and it becomes part of the culture at some point, and people may or may not change their perceptions. Now, on the point of the marriage issue, I think, yeah, I understand this perspective, because this is something which also exists within born Muslim families. And one case study is the South Asian community in the UK, which still uses, and you can find it also, West African families in France. It's not specific to South Asia, but people have these kind of like social categories, castes, some of which are derivated from the Hindu/British caste system. And or I will never let my son marry or my daughter marry a mochi, which is a shoemaker, because we are from the Rajput caste, which is a bit higher, and stuff. And for these very same reasons, they have this perception that people from lower categories are just too different for families to flourish together. Let's say. However, I think that in contexts like the UK, and especially France, where it's much more common to find people from different cultures and different social economic backgrounds marrying, I think the issue is not as much what people perceive as being culture or identity, but it's more about values. What values do the spouses share? What values do the families share? Um, because at the end of the day, I think even if we take people from a similar culture, from a similar upbringing, a similar social and economic background, because insights into my personal life before Islam, I had long-term relationships with people who were roughly not from the same European background, we grew up in the same areas, and however, it was not enough to make the relationship last, because we had just two different, like our values were too different. What we wanted in life, how we perceived our role in the society, in the world, our views on philosophy, on religion were just too different. We were not aligned, and on the top of that, we didn't have the tools, the psychological, emotional, intellectual tools to make the relationship work. How do you manage a conflict? How do you navigate disagreements? How do you navigate people having different priorities, having different stories? A big part is how do you set boundaries with your families if they become a bit too intrusive, or they put too much strain on the marriage? How do you deal with finances, for example? And these are in the mainstream known factors for breaking up marriages. People are just not equipped because we are not given these tools at school. It's not our parents, not at university, not in the workplace. We may or may not find them on YouTube nowadays, but still, I think people are not equipped with the kind of tools to make marriages work in the first place.
Yeah, well, so I get what you're saying, William. The fact that people in today's society don't have the tools to deal with marriage related issues, that's across the board. So it doesn't matter who you're marrying. This generation, it's very difficult for them to deal with being in a marriage. I'm looking at it from the fact that no converts are marrying each other. And what happens is that it creates a total vacuum. Like I said, usually when people convert to Islam from a European background, they're the only Muslim within their social sphere. And that's very lonely, and that's very difficult to change, your family's opinions and thoughts, or change their hearts. But in a marriage where you have two people, two white Muslims, now both of those converts, instead of exiting the social sphere, because usually when a convert gets married into a Muslim family, especially for a woman, they assimilate into the culture of the husband, and they usually end up not seeing their family as often or even not at all. But if you have a marriage in these cases, now you have two, now these two Muslims have each other, and that's, like, and it become doesn't become as difficult anymore. The families come from a similar culture, so even though they're not Muslim, it's a lot easier for them to get along. And once they have, let's say they have a kid, now they have three Muslims within that in that social sphere. You have another kid, you have four Muslims within that cultural sphere, and you network with other converts. Now you have five or six. Then you start to achieve a critical mass in which it's a lot easier to accept Islam and stay in the religion. Now, I mean, if people, there are situations where converts can't marry, or it's not feasible or desirable for them to marry another convert. I get that. That's, for them, that it may be better for them to marry into a Muslim family, but I think for many other white people who have either taken the Shahada or are thinking about converting to Islam, there's no societal organizational structure that's even close to what, Arab Muslims have, or Somali Muslims have, or Pakistani Muslims have in the West already. So you need to start building these institutions from the ground up. And just to what you were saying about, Joram van Klaveren, I've spoken with Joram before. He's a very nice gentleman. It's great that he converted to Islam. I think, and this is I think one of the only channels that talks about this, is that there's this schism that exists within right-wing European politics. And, you have the anti-Islam right, which basically their main anger is toward Islam. Everything's about Islam, 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 Islam. That's what they hate the most. And every single political party in Europe is on this particular side. So, that's one faction of right-wing European politics. We'll call that the anti-Islam right. But there's another schism on the right that many Muslims do not know about. In fact, they pretty much didn't realize that they existed until recently, and that is the dissident right. So the dissident right, their attitudes towards Islam range from negative to positive. Some of them don't care about Islam as a religion per se. Their main qualm is, the demographic change of Europe, ethnic wise. It doesn't matter if they're Muslim or not Muslim. Their fear is that they're going to become a hated minority in their own homelands in the West within about 30, 40 years. And these two groups actually despise one another. The dissident right, they despise Tommy Robinson, they despise, Douglas Murray, because, their attitudes about, Islam, for starters, are totally different. And I think, what we need to point out, in the discourse, is that the more Europeans hate on Islam, the worse it is for the demographic situation. Because what you're doing is, white people are converting to Islam regardless, whether you like it or not. When you keep pushing them away, and you keep kicking them out of the house, and you keep writing them out of the will, they have no choice but to assimilate into an existing Muslim community. If this anger towards Islam wasn't as harsh, then what you would see naturally is that, these converts would, like the African Americans or the Tzotzil Muslims in Mexico, would simply, for the most part, create their own organizations, marry each other, have children, stay within a marriage if one of them does convert to Islam, and then, Islam would grow naturally from the ground up. And, the Muslims of non-European origin would say, look, Islam actually is preserving the culture of the people, and you can use it as a bargaining chip for the safety and security of Muslims currently living in the West. So I think it's whenever I see, like, any type of mainstream discourse between, Muslims and people on, like you said, the European right or the right wing, people like Douglas Murray and Jordan Peterson and Tommy Robinson, they're not far right. They're Zionist, Israel firsters. This they have a lot of funding, and their whole spiel, their whole gig is antagonizing Muslims. And it's like these hand-picked interlocutors whose just sole job is to just rile up Muslims in the Muslim community. And like Dilly Hussein has tried to get away from that recently, interviewing some people on the dissident right. But it remains to be seen, that, like, this discourse is not going anywhere good, because the people that you're picking have nothing but mutual animosity towards each other. So that's my take on that. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's interesting because yeah, this is like anti-Islam has been the main narrative for so long. Um, I'm also wondering, to what extent this dissident right can accept slash include Muslims, because the thing is, when it comes to political parties and political movements at large, I think people often rely on symbolism, the almost mythological opposition between the Christian white Europe and the brown Muslim Arab or Turk historically. But yeah,
Dissident, no, you can't. Just to point out, you can't. In my
yeah,
opinion, you cannot ally with the dissident right.
yeah,
One, because they're so controversial that if you're a Muslim of any standing, you would be deplatformed. I mean, these people are being deplatformed left, right, and center. And secondly, they still have a lot of animosity, like just with non-white immigration. So you can't really ally with these people. But what you can do is, if you have if you try to have moral stances and principles as a Muslim community, what that does is that this separates these two groups, these two schisms on the right. When you're trying to argue with Jordan Peterson or Douglas Murray and turning it into a racial issue, what you're doing is that you're uniting these two factions, and we don't want that. We want these two factions to be in disunity as much as possible. But I don't think allying with them is a good idea, because A, they're very controversial. You might actually lose your job, and B, we don't even agree with each other on certain issues. So I that just to just to clear that up. So go ahead.
yeah. No, no, no. It's a definitely an interesting phenomenon. Especially you mentioned like Dili Hussein. Yeah, I found it a really insightful, almost sociological slash ethnographic initiative. How do these people think, and especially because yeah, they're anti-Zionist. I think this also has a huge part to play in that. Oh, that's definitely something to be closely followed and see how it evolves with time.
Yeah, yeah, these, like I said, they exist in like outside spheres and like the social media realm. Unless you're really in tune or following these people, your average mainstream Muslim is going to just think that there's some like absolute fringe group. Their main focus, Muslim communities, are going to focus on the people who are handpicked to antagonize them. Your Douglas Murrays, your Jordan Petersons, those are the ones who get the big book deals. Those ones who are pushed out into the
Yeah, yeah.
representing Western civilization. But if you
Mm.
talk to your average Westerner, they don't know who Jordan Peterson is. Like they just don't want forever wars. They don't want their tax dollars going to bomb kids in the Middle East. Like that's the thing. We don't. Here's a big problem, William. Muslim organizations, they don't do research. They don't collect data. And when they do get data from other organizations, they discard it. I mean, there was a poll released by More in Common a couple of months ago about what do non-Muslims think about Muslim populations in the UK. And amazingly, what was it? I think it was like 12% had a very negative opinion of Muslims, 9% somewhat negative. So 21% were the negative opinion of Muslims. 40% don't know or don't care. So that's 4 out of 10 non-Muslim Britons. And then 17% had a somewhat positive image of Muslims, and 18% had a very positive image of Muslims. This is a far better picture than, the Londonistan March. But the thing is, the Londonistan March, that's what sticks in Muslims' mind. They all hate us. And I think, it's a major problem that we don't do statistical analyses on the populations that we should be giving dawah to. And this has a major effect on how we, think about giving dawah in the West. So.
Yeah, I think you've got a few organizations that are going in that direction. And but it's yeah, there are a few. This is what I would say. It's maybe a trend that yeah, people are not usually interested in these issues, but I think it's getting there. I mean, again, talking from the UK perspective, which is very very different from all the European countries and what may happen in North America. Um, but yeah, and yeah, also about. Uh, I'm now bouncing back on a previous question. I think, one thing I've seen also happening, whether it is in France or in the UK, is I have seen uh, converts marrying other converts, whether they're like black converts marrying black converts, white converts marrying white converts. It exists from like many different generations. But I also think like on a technical aspect, I think at the current time, and it was even more 10 years ago, it's something which is very hard technically to achieve because like where do you find them, these wet converts, I think. But again, this is something which has to be thought about on the long term because societies evolve and the more people become Muslim, I think this is going to change. And maybe, I don't know how the social landscape of Muslims in Britain or France will look in 20 years time, but I think it will be uh, interesting to see it, to say the least.
Yeah.
Rob, uh,
Yeah, I do have to
um,
go soon. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I was about to, if you're okay with it, ask you a few questions
Sure.
now regarding Islam for Europeans. So, uh, the story of how I stumbled upon it was quite funny because I was researching Muslims who were, I would say, riding the masculinity bandwagon back in the days where it was Trump president, and we had like all these conversations. And I cannot actually remember. Did I just do a Google search um, about Islam, Europe, white people, and I stumbled upon your website, and it was really, I would say, an interesting journey to say the least, because first of all, I thought I found like the holy grail of oh my God, there's in the midst of everything, a Muslim white supremacist. What is this website? But reading your articles, watching your videos, I realized that no, it is actually something very, very different. But I want to ask you a question about the image you used a bit later. But first of all, um, what was your uh, intention while creating Islam for Europeans, and what thing made you, what clicked? Yeah, I'm gonna make this website and like create this community.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, like it was a series of different events and experiences with the Muslim community. One particular instance, I think stands out. I think it was around 2014. The mosque was doing an open house for the non-Muslim community in Windsor, and they set up these different like boards. Like what is Islam, what is fasting, what is prayer, like what does Islam say about women, and then like we would be paired up, two Muslims, and then the non-Muslim guests would come in, and we would just like kind of show them around these different boards, right? So I was paired up with a Pakistani sister, and this older white gentleman came in, and we started like showing him all the different things about Islam, and then it came to Islam and the family, and then he asked, how do Muslims get married? What do they date? What's the process, right? And the sister, she gave a very good explanation. She said that like the families are heavily involved. Before the potential couple even meets, the families will do an improper investigation, find out what the family is like, see if they're compatible, and then they'll have a chaperone meeting where the two families and the potential couple are all sitting in a room together, right? And if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But there's no dating. The families are heavily involved, from step one until the time they get married and beyond, right? So it's a very good explanation. So the gentleman was like, "Oh, okay, interesting." And then he looked at me and he said, "Well, what do you guys do?" And I didn't have an answer for him. I didn't really think about it. and that kind of just started, the gears started turning, when he said those things. So that was one experience. Another experience was going to university and doing my master's degree, and seeing the schism between the Muslim Students Association, who were more religious, who were more like moderate, like an accepting, and then the other half of the Muslim youth joined a lot of these leftist, anarcho-communist, organizations that were very anti-white. They would, they have the common saying, it's impossible to be racist to white people. And then this was just a really, it's difficult to give dawah while you're simultaneously saying things like that, but they weren't interested in dawah. So, I noticed, that there was this schism that was existing, with the Muslim youth, because, these people, they don't really interact with, white Canada. And, and just all these experiences that I saw, I'm just like, something needs to be done. I think the current way we're doing something is the way we're doing things at Islamic organizations, it hasn't been working. We have a 70-80% dropout rate of converts. Something needs to be done. And I kind of piggybacked on an existing website with Islam for Europeans. I didn't create it, but I kind of took on this endeavor, to be the front man for this organization. So.
Okay. And in a nutshell, what was your intention and the purpose?
I just wanted to start the conversation as to, where we're headed as a greater Muslim community as a whole. Because if we keep doing things the way that we're doing, Muslim youth is going to be alienated. The converts are going to be alienated. The Muslim community will become more and more insular, and the image of Islam in the West will appear as more and more like, like this kind of fifth column that the anti-Islam right will use against us. And I just think, thought, we need to change the narrative, because if we don't, we're headed on a crash course, especially in Europe, where we have this major conflict between, Muslims and Westerners. So yeah, that was my main intention. There's a whole host of problems, and I just wanted to start the conversation and provide a different narrative.
And how was the initial response you got for this initiative? Did you face any backlash?
The response was mostly positive. I mean, even I read an article about how we support the Black American Muslim Conference, because they have issues that are specifically related to Black Muslims, and the response from African American Muslims was very positive. The response from many Muslims around the world was very positive. So overall, it was people have responded positively to it. And I knew this, that going into this type of endeavor, that I'm gonna have to be on my absolute best behavior, and have like high moral principles, and be to act as a first-rate organization, because I understand these are very controversial topics. But I have to be like in tip-top shape. We can't afford to, I mean, it's not in the Sunnah, but like I said, not using racialized language, or even putting all the blame on the Muslim community. I think we need to get away from that and start looking at overarching reasons why there's like this conflict between Islam and the West. But the only detractors we've really had were just a few other white converts. I mean, those are our main detractors. Everybody else supports the idea. It's only the few white converts that are against what we're doing.
Yeah, I think my intuition tells me, because I think I know who you're referring to, because I know I've come across a publication not very long ago mentioning some for Europeans. And for my own research, I had to dig deep into the content you've produced, the things you've written. And I think one of the main contentions these people had was Islam for Europeans being like very like hard right-leaning initiative. While if you read some of the articles you publish, especially the one about the Black Conference, those mentioning some non-Muslim sisters we have, I mean non-Muslim females we have in our families who do not necessarily abide by modesty rules, or talking about how white converts generally, as a social phenomenon, we are very often put on a pedestal and like given, a de facto role of ambassador of Islam and Muslim. I know some people would find it like these really, really like left leaning, to say the least. But as I always say, Islam is the middle way path.
Yes.
But uh, I, I don't know if it came across your mind that maybe the way you present the website, because I don't know if it has changed, but a few years ago, we had this like banner with maybe some Bosnian Muslims praying together. The first blog article was, why white converts should marry each other. Do you think maybe it has confused some people, thinking it was like make Islam white again, this kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean that's a controversial in and of itself. I mean, there's a whole host of overarching factors. I mean, marriage is just one of many issues. I mean, the main thing is that we don't have a sub community. If we did, a lot of these problems would dissipate. Not all. You're always going to have problems, but and like I said, we're not telling people who to marry. People can marry whoever they want. But what we're saying is that the option simply isn't there. We don't have a sub community to begin with. And that's why even the white people who are interested in Islam, it's difficult for them to convert, not because, not just because it's challenging, but also because they're going to be the only white Muslim within their social, their work sphere, their home sphere. And that's a very challenging thing to do. You're all alone. So I get it. I get why people will be upset at an article such as that. Like as I've gone throughout the years, I think I've matured a little bit more. Maybe I could have kind of put things a little bit differently, but I think in general, I mean, you know if, like you said, the whole thing about white pedestalism, when you don't have the sub community, that's the role that Islamic organizations and masajid kind of give to the white convert. Since they don't have a Muslim sub community, we need to overcompensate by giving him all these accolades and gifts and putting him up on a pedestal when African Americans don't get the same accolades. And I could totally understand why African American Muslims would be upset at this type of situation. So I great questions, William. I do have to go and get ready for work. It was a
Okay.
great conversation. Did you have any, like, one more question that you wanted to ask me?
No, I think I've asked you the main questions. I mean, there's maybe one last actually, which is more on a personal level, from convert to convert. What would you say was the most challenging experience you had in life? And how did that make you, let's say, how did you overcome that to make you like a better person, whether it is with other Muslims or in general?
That's a great question. Wow, that's a really good question. I think, um, I mean, having, my family was totally okay with my conversion to Islam. I'm not going to go into detail, but I would say dealing with a non-Muslim family that is totally against one's conversion, even if it's on like a tangential basis or like secondhand basis, that's very challenging to deal with, because you basically can't say anything about Islam or even religion in general. You have to avoid certain topics in conversation. You have to sneak out to go pray in the park. You have to compromise on certain things. You have to pick and choose your battles. And that's true even if your family is accepting of your conversion to Islam. It's never going to be that perfect. And I think that was definitely the biggest challenge by
Mm.
far. I mean, physically, I mean, fasting. I had never fasted before. I was used to eating all the time. That comes with time. But yeah, I would say dealing with a non-Muslim family who has antagonistic attitudes towards Islam. So
Did it get better?
yes, inshallah, it did
Mm.
get better. Yeah, but
Oh, that's good to hear.
mhm. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for stopping by, William. I know there's probably questions that didn't get addressed, or maybe we can have another interview where I start asking you more questions. But I think it was a productive conversation. Would you say so, William?
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. And I think, this kind of conversation is important to clarify, a few points and dispel people's misconception. Because, as always, one thing I took as a principle of my work is, try not to, when you see something which seems odd or seems shocking or seems like bad or whatever, at first sight, the job of a sociologist, and I think can relate because you're into psychology, it's first of all, try to understand what is going on. Why is this person doing this and that? Why do people behave in a certain way? So we can eventually, it's almost clinical work. If we don't understand what is happening, we cannot address the issue and we cannot progress forward. We cannot improve ourselves and the society. And I think this is, what conversation should be about, really.
Par chance, est-ce qu'on peut faire une conversation en français? Est-ce que vous avez une communauté française en France? Tu penses qu'il y aurait une communauté française qui peut aider notre conversation?
Oh, ça fait plus de 10 ans que j'ai quitté la France, donc
Oui.
c'est difficile à dire. Après, je pense que peut-être que de ton côté, peut-être si on regarde au niveau du Québec, Ontario, je sais pas, peut-être qu'il y aura une communauté francophone
Oui.
qui serait intéressée. Mais je pense que le contexte français est d'une part très, 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 très varié et a beaucoup changé durant ces 10 dernières années.
Oui, je dois améliorer mon français. Alors, tu parles français beaucoup plus mieux que moi, mais j'espère mais c'est un espère pour moi de communiquer mes idées en français avec les personnes au Québec puis en France. Mais ça, c'est une autre chose. OK.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay. Thank you so much, William. It was a wonderful conversation, but I'll have to stop it for today. Thank you so much. This is Islam for Europeans. Please subscribe to William's channel as well. It's this channel, the same name, right? William Barylo.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Stop the recording.
Walaikum salam.